Hello, everyone, and good afternoon, and welcome to another Career Tip Tuesday. I am your host, Sherry Sims, founder of Black Career Women's Network, and we are going to be doing part two of what we did. What we talked about 2 weeks ago was the shifts and drifts in the workplace and how they impact your role. So before we get started, I want to allow some of you to get in. And when you do arrive, please let me know where you are tuning in from. So that way I know what part of the country you are watching. And please feel free to ask questions as we always do and engage in our Career Tip Tuesday. All right, so we're going to be talking about shifts and drifts in workplace part 2. So just to kind of give you a recap of last week, what we did is that we went over 6 or 7 different types of organizational shifts and drifts that can happen in the workplace if you're not paying attention. And so just to kind of give you a recap of those, and I've got my notes. If you see me looking to the sides, because I've got my notes. Hi, Iris. Hi, Tanya. Thank you for tuning in. So just to recap the shifts and drifts we talked about last week for part 1, we talked about corporate marginalization, explaining what that is, organizational drift. We also talked about career plateau. We also talked about corporate gaslighting. We talked about cultural shifts. We talked about a little bit of organizational disenchantment. And I think that was it. Yeah, cultural shift, organizational disenchantment, corporate gaslighting, career plateau, organizational drift, and corporate marginalization. Those are the ones that we talked about and gave definitions of what they are. So in part 2, because we just did not have time to go over everything, we really should do a webinar on this, like a whole 2-hour process for real. But what we're going to do today is break down specifically what are some of the strategies or things you need to consider if you are dealing with any of these. So as I go through each one, we'll give a brief definition again, and then we will go through and give some brief, quick things that you can, strategies you can do. Now, if you've ever experienced any of these, we want to know. We want to know if you've ever experienced any of these and what have you done to overcome these specific hurdles that can actually halt or make it challenging to navigate in the workplace, and maybe make you think about making some decisions that you didn't think about before. All right, so we're going to start with corporate marginalization. Now, corporate marginalization is where an employee has a good reputation, they have a good history of solid performance, but maybe they're being sidelined or overlooked in the organization because there's been a lot of changes, right? Marginalization happens or can happen when the company's priorities shift, or when there is change in leadership, or if there's restructuring. All right. When those new power dynamics come into the fold, what happens is that individual who's a high performer, sometimes they may not be recognized or valued in the way that they used to be. Now, there are some other components that could impact that, but that's specifically what corporate marginalization is. Now, here's a strategy for it. We only have 30 minutes, so we got to cram this in fast, okay? When we think about corporate marginalization, some of the strategy you can consider is to reassess your role and to seek feedback. Another thing you can also do too is kind of reevaluate your relationships with individuals who are peers in your workplace, because they can also be ones that you want them to be able to speak highly about you when you're not in the room. And you want them to also be someone who can be an advocate to continue to support the work and the impact that you make in the organization. Because if no one is helping to advocate and push to support that, if the new leaders who are coming in do not see the value, then guess what? It can go on deaf ears. And so you want to make sure you're reassessing your role if you need to tweak that, and then also seek feedback. And I think it's important to think about when you're talking about experiencing corporate marginalization. Just remember where it comes from. Just because you have a good reputation and you have a good solid performance, you have to always pay attention to what is going on in your workplace with the people and the environment and the company structure. Because if all of those things are shifting, you have to make sure you have the power and the positioning to make sure that you are in a place to where the good reputation and the history of solid performance you have will be consistent, will continue to be appreciated, and also that then be elevated as well. So I think that's good to think about. The second one is organizational drift. Now, what organizational drift is where an employee's role or responsibility, their influence is slowly diminishes over time. Okay. Slowly. How this happens, and it goes back to kind of like marginalization, but this can happen without you really paying attention, which means that if the corporate goals are restructuring or if there's change in leaders, like it would be with marginalization, the challenge is that the key contributors from the past who valued your work and your presence, it may start to feel less relevant or important to what the changes currently are. So you have to pay attention to make sure that what you're doing is continues to have impact, continues to have value, and that you have the people in place to help to advocate for that. Right? A drift is a little bit different than marginalization, because in marginalization, which means somebody is really trying to um really what I say, really devalue, and they're doing it in more of an intentional, harmful way, where organizational drift is, hey, things are changing, things are moving, and maybe they just and the new leaders are not thinking about how you're supposed to be incorporated into that. So the drift is something that can happen without you paying attention. So that's important to understand. Again, going back to understanding the people and the places you work with, all of these that we're talking about really kind of intertwine with each other. But one may be a little bit more of a prevalent than the other when it comes to thinking about how it's impacting you. So again, 30 minutes, we're moving quick through these. But again, with the organizational drift, it's important to request clarification. You may need to set new goals. Now, the request clarification is important, because if you need to clarify, hey, do we need to evaluate how my role is impacting the business and how I show up, or how I need to show up to support the new initiatives? Then get that clarification around what you need to adjust. Find cross-functional projects to kind of help show value for what you do and how it is important to have that connection. Making sure you're seeking mentorship as well, and that you're showcasing your achievements to the new people who are coming in. And again, a lot of this it really takes for someone who has a strong ability to have self-advocacy for themselves, because if you're in a position to where you don't have someone who can speak up for you when you're in your room, you've got to be able to showcase your achievements and show why what you do is still important to the new goals and the new shift in the way, in the direction that the company is going. All right. So that, again, organizational drift can happen right before your eyes when you're not paying attention. So I think it's good to make sure that you're recognizing that. All right, moving pretty quickly here. So the next one is career plateau. And career plateau is, again, where you just reach a point where there's like no opportunity left. You've hit a glass ceiling, or maybe there's no other way for you, no other room for you to grow within the organization, and you become stagnant. If that's the case, then you want to stay with the organization, explore lateral moves, advocate for your development, which means that what other things can you advocate for where you can achieve, whether it's new certifications or skill sets or whatever, training, whatever that looks like, that could elevate you to another level. It may not necessarily be like if you've already hit the glass ceiling, but what else can you do within the organization to where your skills are transferable? Right now, if the career plateau and none of this is an option, then you might need to consider external options, which means maybe you need to consider going to another organization if it's no longer working for you where you currently are. Career plateau is pretty simple. Easy to hit if you don't, especially for someone who's kind of went through the ranks and they've been with the organization for a while, and they actually have, has gone as far as they can go within the organization. So something to think about there. All right. The next one is corporate gaslighting. Okay. We talked about corporate gaslighting last week, and we know that this term is often used. We hear it a lot, gaslighting, things like that. This is when we know it's about an employee or a team member that feels that their work is less valuable. They know they've been a high performer. They know they have a history of contributing, positively to the organization. But again, going back to their work being minimized or accomplishments being minimized, maybe they're being denied the recognition for some work that they've done that has really helped to move the needle on the business. Also, too, if there's an environment that's being created and it's uncertain about their value within the organization because things are changing, the gaslighting can lead to you getting frustrated, for you starting to doubt who you are and what you bring to the table, and even getting upset to say, how dare you, because I have a great track record of really, being a high performer in this organization. And now this is starting to happen. When you start to experience gaslighting, document your achievements, stay confident in what you know you're able to do, even if you have a history of bringing things to the table and being able to accomplish things, and confront the issues and the allies. If you feel like you're being gaslighted, address it and find allies. And through all of these, actually, make sure you're finding allies who can speak highly about what you do and what you bring to the table and how valuable it is to all of the changes that are happening within the organization. So again, gaslighting is something that we definitely should be picking up on and being able to have the emotional intelligence to address and advocate for ourselves when we need to. So just wanted to share that with you. And I know I'm moving pretty fast through these because I'm going to go back and retrack in a minute. But the next one is organizational disenchantment. Now, we talked about this last week as well. This is about when you are starting to feel let down or disappointed by the organization. Maybe because after you have always been supported, you've always had champions to help you with, through things, but now it's changing. Now there's no one really there to support you. Maybe there's a lack of support, a lack of recognition, even value for what you do. Again, remember, all of these are intertwined with each other, right? And so now you're in a space where it's like, what is going on here? What is going on? This is not the great place it used to be for me when I was working here before, right? So to me, organizational disenchantment can also be denial of what's really going on. You could be disillusioned about what's really going on. You also may start to feel as if the organization no longer aligns with your values or your goals, and so your motivation starts to decrease, your engagement starts to decrease, and maybe even your performance starts to wane. And when that happens, you need to now look at either reconnecting your values to the organization and the new shifted direction it's going, or you need to consider some internal changes, which means, do I need to go to another department, or do I need to leave the organization altogether? So you have to consider those things as well. And sometimes these things are hard pills to swallow, because when we start thinking about this disenchantment piece, we want to do things to make things go back to the way they used to be. And that's not the case all the time. And so the reality is, if we don't have the power and positioning that we need in order for us to be able to, position ourselves to get through this disenchantment, then we definitely have to come to the reality of, going somewhere where where we can reconnect with our values, or in another organization, or find another department that fits where your values, in alignment with that. It just depends. So you've got to self-assess that. Trust your gut, trust what you see, validate what you hear and you think, or if it's just you feel in a certain way, come out of your feelings and get really clear about what's really going on. If that makes a lot of sense to all of you. All right. And then the last one is cultural shift. All right. And cultural shift, we talked about last week, is when, you just, and again, all these intertwined together, but the cultural shift is when you just start to not feel supported or you're feeling under valued. When a cultural shift happens pretty quickly. You probably see that first before you start to see the organizational structure shift. You probably feel like, oh, something's going on around here. Ain't right. But the cultural shift you will see. The cultural shift is always a direct impact of organizational shifts or drifts, right? So with the cultural shift, if you have new leadership changes, if the company's changed in strategy, as we talked about before, maybe there's some internal market pressures that are going on to where the company has to meet those market needs. When those cultural changes happen and they're no longer in alignment with your values or the way you work, which is your work style, then you can get left behind or may start to feel that disenchantment and that disconnection with the organization. So how some of the strategies you can use to be able to deal with that cultural shift is adapt to the new norms. I can't get that out, you all. The new norms. If they're in alignment with your values, though, stay informed on what is going on within the company. All right. And then stay flexible and open. because it may just be something that could be for the greater good of the organization. However, it's growing pains for the employees who are used to things being a certain way. Or if there are new leaders coming in who have new or coming in with values and beliefs that are maybe not in alignment with the current corporate values and structure, and they want to come in and put their mark on things and do things their way and change it up and blow it up or whatever it is, you still have to make sure that you adapting to those norms that are in alignment, making sure you stay informed and flexible and be open. Because sometimes if we're someone who is not comfortable with change, then what we are experiencing can make us feel uncomfortable because it's taking us out of our comfort zone. So get clear about how you're feeling and what you feel and how you feel it and why you are feeling it. And always remember that each individual time that there are things going on with an organization, positive or negative, you have to be paying attention. You should always be paying attention to the people that you work with, the different shifts in the organization, how leadership is engaging with each other. If there are specific habits within norms, cultural norms and habits within the organization, and those start to change, you've got to look at those. Anytime that there's a lot of change in leadership or this organizational structure, people do get nervous because they could be scared that maybe their department's going to be eliminated or their job's going to be eliminated. And so that tends to bring out certain things within a person's character where they start to guard their work, protect what they do. They may, start to be a little bit more cutthroat because they think they're trying to protect what they think they need to for the sake of them holding on to holding on to what they have. And I think we all know there's no such thing as job security anymore. So for those people who have that kind of attitude, let it go, because it doesn't matter. All you're doing is hurting yourself and hurting the relationships and impacting the workplace culture in a negative way with those toxic behaviors when you do that, right? And we know those people. We probably work with some of them now who there may be not any of this going on in your organization, but they just like that, where they just feel like everybody's a threat and they gotta, they have to be, very toxic in their behaviors to protect what they think is theirs. And nobody should be that wrapped up in a role to where you have to treat other people that way, right? We know what happens. I'm just saying that you shouldn't have to feel that way. So let's go back and recap these organizational shifts and drifts. First one is corporate marginalization strategy. Reassess your role and seek feedback. The next one is organizational drift, where your strategy should be, what you should consider, should I say, is setting new goals, request clarification about your role and responsibilities, find cross-functional projects that can help you to add value of the role you have across different departments, seek mentorship and showcase your achievements, pat yourself on the back for the good work you do and make sure that others see it. Even for those leaders who don't see the value in it, you can change that around and get them to see it, right? Don't go through that, let them dismiss what you bring to the table. All right. Next one is career plateau. Some of your strategies you can consider is exploring lateral moves, advocating for your development, and considering external options if you feel like there's absolutely nowhere else for you to go. Next one is corporate gaslighting. Some of the strategies you can use is to document your achievements, which we should be doing anyway, because by the time our annual review comes around, we want to be able to have a list of those things that we have accomplished to make sure that our raise is in alignment with what we've achieved. And then, of course, stay confident, confront the issues, and find allies. I can't stress enough how important having allies are in your organization. We're not talking about a mentor. We're talking about someone who's going to advocate and speak up for you when you're not in the room, not suggest you for a new role, but really someone who can say, hey, this person does great work. They really do add value. And this is why we need to consider them for that project or what have you. But just being able to have someone who can think about any new leaders coming in who may see, well, I don't see where her work is really relevant to this now, right? Where they can say, well, no, slow down and let me give you a little bit more context about how this individual has been able to contribute in a very positive way to the organization. Mary Smith says, I agree with you being a business owner. Absolutely. Absolutely. You've got to think about that. So again, Don't let anybody, don't, the gaslighting can be harmful. You absolutely need to have the emotional intelligence to be able to handle it and deal with that. But again, finding allies, the people who can speak to you when you're not in the room is speak to who you are when you're not in the room is important. It's hugely important, especially when an organization is going through a lot of change. Also, now, just to recap this organization disenchantment, the strategies are reconnect with your values and consider internal changes. What I mean by consider internal changes, look at what's going on around you, and see if they're going to be in alignment with who you are. Make sure that you reconnect with your values, which means just revisit your values, revisit the organization's values to see if all that's still in alignment. Use your intuition. We all have it. If it's feeling kind of weird, reassess what's going on. And if you need to realign it, reconnect, do that. If you feel like that after you do the reassessing and you're like, you know what, this isn't it for me anymore, I got to go. Whatever that looks like for you. Don't, I'm not giving you what you should do. What I'm doing is giving you strategies on what you need to consider. Okay. All right. And the last one is cultural shift. And the cultural shift is where we adapt to new norms and stay informed and stay flexible. Okay. But we also need to take sure you take into making sure that you take into consideration your values and making sure all of that is in alignment. The cultural shift can take a change and it might be temporary where things might feel weird for a while because you've got new leadership or maybe there's some organizational priorities that are changing, things like that. So you do want to adapt to the new norms, but the most important thing is to stay informed on what's going on. If you don't know what's going on, how can you make sure that you are not interjecting yourself in a way that's still continuing to add value, or just understanding where you fall into all of this? Because if you're not staying informed and you kind of go on with business as usual, and they're looking at that work and saying, yeah, that's okay, but it's not really what we want anymore. You got to stay informed on making sure what you're doing is still relevant to the business need. And again, that goes back to that organizational drift. And two, a lot of times, if the organizational communication, if that is not good, then a lot of this stuff can happen really quickly before you know it. So again, in order for you to be able to see the organizational drift or notice it, and before you become disenchanted, look at the lines of communication. What's being communicated to the employees in the company? What's being communicated to your leader, which then now trickles down to you or you and your team if you have a team. So again, those are things you need to consider. Cultural shift, again, kind of is, that it doesn't start with that. It's some other things that go on way before the cultural shift starts to happen. But again, staying informed, also staying flexible too, are highly important, especially if you're someone who wants to stay where you are and kind of work through the growing pains of the changes that are happening within the organization. All right. That is what we had today. I told you we had a lot today and I had to push through real fast. So if you have any questions, please. I know that Mary talked about agreeing with her as the business owner, and even as a business owner, Mary, and even if it's just you or if you have one employee or two, any changes you make within the organization and you grow, that line of communication coming down, I think is hugely important, which you didn't talk about a lot, but how an organization communicates the changes that are being made, how they communicate new leaders coming into the organization, how they communicate to the new leaders what they're expecting for them to be able to do and how they want them to impact the organization is important too. Because what can happen is, and a lot of times especially when we get to the disenchanted part, what happens is that we start to get to a place to where the communication is not happening in the way it's supposed to. And when you and if it gets down to your employees and they start to observe that they're working for an organization where they're making decisions and not communicating to the workforce what those decisions are, that disenchantment can start to happen. Right? So communication is important when you start to experience drifts, when you start to see any kind of cultural shifts. That communication can impact and create either a positive or negative space around what all of that looks like, or how your employees are going to adapt, perceive the changes that are being made, and how new leaders who are coming in, how they are executing some of those changes and how they communicate too. If they're coming in and making changes and not really communicating to their direct reports around what these changes are, it's like, you're starting to now build a workplace of distrust, and that all those things lead to some toxic workplace and negative cultural um, shifts that happen within the workplace. So I think it's important to recognize those things and then making sure that you are equipped and prepared to be able to adjust to some of those organizational shifts and drifts. All right. That's what we have for part 2 for today, you all. So if you all are connected to us, follow us on our LinkedIn page. You can also follow me on LinkedIn too. It's Sherry Sims. Please, you can go and visit our website, bcwnetwork.com, or download our app at off of the Apple Store or Google Play and get connected with our community and take advantage of some of our resources as well. This video will be available on replay on LinkedIn, and you can also access it in our mobile app or our community as well. But I know, look, 1 minute left to go. So I want to go ahead and leave you all with this. The life God gave you is larger than the life you've been living. And God gives us all special gifts. And it's up to us to discover what those gifts are and use those to work in our purpose. So I hope you all have an amazing rest of your work week. And we will see you in 2 weeks. Bye, everyone.